My wife left me for her ex, and my daughter called him the ideal father until I exposed the truth and destroyed her fantasy. That's the summary they'd put on the evening news, and for a long time, I couldn't argue with it. But you have to know the setup, the foundation I laid for 17 years, before you understand the dynamite she placed under it. I was 34 years old and worked as an electrical contractor. It wasn't the kind of job you saw on billboards. I specialized in high-voltage industrial sites. The metal factories, the chemical plants, the places where the wrong move meant you were instantly vaporized. It was dangerous work, dealing with systems that could turn a man into barbecue if he messed up. But the money was solid, enough that we had a nice, comfortable house in a safe neighborhood. It was the kind of stability I'd sacrificed everything to build. Ashley and I met young. I was 17 and she was 16. We were the classic high school sweethearts who became teenage parents when Ashley got pregnant senior year. Everyone told us we were idiots. They said our marriage would crash and burn, that we'd never make it. My motivation, the quiet driving force of my entire adult life, was proving every single one of those cynics wrong. I believed my self-worth, my value as a man, was inextricably tied to the security I provided. Stability is love, my worth is in my provision. I busted my back getting certified as an electrician. I worked double shifts and took every overtime opportunity I could find. I climbed my way up from apprentice to journeyman to master electrician. By the time I was 30, I had my own crew running jobs. My body hurt most mornings, but that ache was a reminder that Maya, our daughter, who was 16 now, had a safe place to sleep and a college fund already growing. I sacrificed time so they could have security. That was the trade-off, and I thought it was a fair one. I was the guy who paid for the private school, the dance lessons, the soccer leagues, and the car she got on her 16th birthday. All of it came from those long days, installing circuit breakers and running conduit, often working 60-hour weeks during busy seasons. I was the provider, and that identity was everything to me. Ashley worked part-time at a salon. It was mostly for the social interaction, not because we desperately needed the money. She'd cut hair, do nails, and gossip with her clients. It made her happy, and I never complained. I figured she deserved something outside of the home since she had spent her early 20s raising a child while I was busy running cable through factories. My focus was always on the practical stuff, the boring stuff, mortgage payments and college funds, the foundational structure of their lives. I didn't realize how much of a gap I was leaving in the roof until it was too late. I was on a job site about 30 minutes from home, wrestling with a high-capacity circuit breaker panel, the kind that could power a small town. The air was thick and humid, smelling of ozone and metal dust. My crew had gone to lunch, but I was trying to finish up this last connection so we could test the system after break. I had the intense focus you need when dealing with thousands of volts, completely in my zone when my phone rang. It was Kevin. My neighbor. Kevin was a former military guy, grounded and observant. He was not the type to call me during work hours for a casual chat. I answered, knowing instinctively that something was terribly wrong. My gut immediately dropped, the cold feeling spreading to my work boots. I expected a fire, or maybe something had happened to Maya. Instead, his voice was panicked as he told me, "Tim, you need to get home right now. There's a U-Haul truck, a big 26-footer, in front of your house, and 3 guys are loading your furniture into it." He thought we were moving, But the whole situation felt off. My brain short-circuited. I stood there in the factory, holding a screwdriver, utterly incapable of processing the information. A U. Haul loading our things, supervised by Ashley, in the middle of a Tuesday while I was at work. None of it made a bit of sense. I managed to tell Kevin I'd be there in 20 minutes, threw my screwdriver onto the bench, and sprinted toward my supervisor, telling him I had an emergency, possibly a robbery in progress. The man looked at my face, didn't ask a single question, and just nodded me out the door. My stable world had just given me notice. I broke every speed limit getting home. The 20-minute drive compressed into what felt like 5 minutes of pure adrenaline. The entire time, my mind raced through impossible scenarios. Was Ashley being forced? Was this some organized, daylight robbery where she was an unwilling accomplice? Had she finally had some kind of mental break from the pressure? None of it fit? The image of the woman I had known for 17 years. As I screeched the wheels into our neighborhood, I saw the U-Haul from the end of the block. It was a massive, 26-foot truck, parked half on our lawn. I slammed on the brakes of my work truck, throwing it into park so fast I didn't even bother to close the door. And there she was, Ashley, standing on the driveway in yoga pants and a tank top, holding a clipboard, looking completely calm. She was supervising the operation while 3 strangers carried our furniture out of the house. She wasn't distressed. She wasn't being forced. She looked annoyed, as if I were the one interrupting her peaceful moving day. But what truly ignited the blind rage inside me was the man standing beside her. He was tall, wearing designer sunglasses and a crisp polo shirt, pointing and directing the movers like he owned the place. This clown was standing on my property, giving orders about my life, about my things, about the pieces of furniture I had paid for with 7 years of missed dinners and 60-hour work weeks. I stormed right up to the polo shirt guy, getting directly in his face. I demanded to know what he thought he was doing. This man had the audacity to glance over at me with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I were a particularly noisy dog, and told me to mind my business. I don't remember consciously deciding to hit him. It was like 17 years of buried stress, professional discipline, and betrayed loyalty all combusted at once. My body moved on pure autopilot. My fist connected with his jaw so hard I felt the impact shoot all the way up my shoulder. He went down like a sack of bricks. His designer sunglasses flew off, skittering across the driveway, and blood immediately began trickling from his lip. I was on him in a second, blind with rage. The movers just stood there, shocked into immobility. This random guy was here, in broad daylight, stealing my things and my wife. I was screaming at him, landing punch after punch, fueled by a terrifying, primal fury. With one hand still gripping his collar, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "There's a robbery at my house," I shouted into the phone, giving the dispatcher my address. "I've got one of them subdued." I hung up before they could ask questions. I was still shaking, the adrenaline making my ears ring. That's when I heard Ashley screaming. Not in fear, but in anger and distress over the man on the ground. She dropped her clipboard and ran over, shoving me hard enough that I actually lost my grip on the polo shirt guy. She dropped to her knees beside him, checking his face, wiping the blood from his nose with the sleeve of her tank top. She looked at him with a tenderness I hadn't seen directed toward me in months, maybe years. That's when it clicked. It wasn't a random robbery. It wasn't a break-in. This was deliberate. This was betrayal on a seismic level. I stared at her, still breathing heavily, my knuckles throbbing. "Do you know this jerk?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear the absolute confirmation of the disaster. Ashley looked up at me. The expression on her face wasn't guilt or shame, it was pure, unadulterated annoyance. The look you give a toddler who's just spilled juice on your clean floor. She told me his name was Blake, and he was her boyfriend. Time stopped. 17 years. A life built from scratch, defying every odd, ruined in one casual, annoyed statement. Before I could process the words, before the ringing in my ears subsided, my work boot connected with Blake's ribs. Hard. He let out a profound groan and curled up. I kicked him again, the sound sickening. "What the hell is this?" I screamed at Ashley. "You're my wife!" "And you are moving our entire life out with your boyfriend in the middle of a Tuesday." I gestured wildly toward the massive U. Hall, then back to her. She was just leaving, taking half of our things without even telling me. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, as if this were just an inconvenience. She told me she was going to call me later. She didn't want a scene. She had just detonated our entire life, and she was concerned about avoiding drama. The police arrived just then, before I could truly lose control again. Two cruisers, lights flashing, bathing the front yard in red and blue. The neighbors, drawn out by the screaming and the flashing lights, were watching the whole thing from their porches. A large officer immediately stepped between me and Blake, who was still curled on the ground moaning. He demanded to know what was going on. I told him I was the homeowner, that I had been called home about a robbery in progress, and that my wife was attempting to move out with her boyfriend and half of our possessions without my knowledge. The officer looked at Ashley, who still wore that mask of annoyance. He asked if I was her husband. She nodded. He then asked if she was removing items from the house. She replied that she was taking her half, like it was the most obvious, reasonable thing in the world. The cop sighed, a sound of profound world wariness. He told her she couldn't just take things from the marital home without a court order, until a judge ordered the assets to be split. She couldn't legally remove furniture or major possessions. Ashley's face went from annoyed to absolute shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The law was not cooperating with her fantasy. The officer explained that her actions could technically be considered theft. Her mouth dropped open. She looked at Blake, then back at the officer, then at me. Her whole, neatly planned exit had been destroyed by an unexpected dose of legal reality. Ashley's attempt to blow up our life and walk away clean had just hit a wall of municipal law. The police officer told her plainly what she was doing could be considered theft, and she needed to go through proper legal channels to split the assets. She could only take personal effects, clothes, toiletries, items clearly hers alone, but the furniture, electronics, and shared property had to stay until sorted out legally. Meanwhile, the second cop helped Blake up. The guy's face was already swelling dramatically, blood smeared across his chin. He was giving me the death glare, but he was wise enough to keep his mouth shut. Ashley demanded to know what she was supposed to do now. The officer shrugged, pointing toward the U-Haul. He told her to have the movers start unloading everything back into the house. Her face went red, shifting from shock to pure fury. She looked at Blake, then at me, then back at the cop. "How long is this going to take?" she snapped. The officer replied, "That depends on how fast your people work, ma'am, but nothing leaves this property until it's all back inside." Ashley turned to Blake, who was still tenderly holding his jaw, and told him to get the movers started. Blake looked at me nervously, clearly worried I might jump him again, before shuffling over to the truck. He looked less like a charming soulmate and more like a busted bag man. The cop then turned his attention back to me. He asked if I wanted to press charges against Ashley for the attempted theft. I thought about it for a second. The immediate satisfaction of seeing her in handcuffs was tempting, but my internal switch had flipped from pure rage to cold, strategic planning. The smarter move was to handle this through divorce court, where I could really make the betrayal hurt her financially. No, I told the officer, keeping my voice level. As long as everything gets put back. He nodded, a look of approval in his eyes. He then asked about Blake. Did I want to press assault charges? I looked over at the guy, whose face looked like ground beef. He probably had a concussion, and I'd gotten my hits in. Pressing charges would just tie me up in court for months, which was time better spent with my lawyer. No on that. Too, I said. I just want him off my property, and I want my furniture back. The officer seemed satisfied with that answer. He went over to Blake and had a conversation I couldn't hear, but I watched Blake nod rapidly. The cops stuck around, their cruisers flashing, while the movers, who looked deeply uncomfortable with their life choices, started hauling all the furniture and boxes back into the house. It took almost 2 hours to get everything back inside. The whole time, Ashley stood on the lawn with her arms crossed, glaring at everyone but mostly at me. She didn't say a single word. When the last box was returned, she grabbed a small bag. I assumed it held her clothes and personal effects, and left with Blake without looking back. I watched them drive away in Blake's shiny Audi. Then, I just stood there in my driveway, looking at the two massive ruts the U-Haul tires had left in the lawn. Kevin, my neighbor, came over, putting a steady, non-judgmental hand on my shoulder. He told me he was sorry and asked if I needed anything. I thanked him for the heads up. He had saved half my assets. Told him I was fine, and headed inside. The house was a catastrophic mess. Furniture was piled in the wrong rooms, boxes were scattered, and half-empty drawers lay everywhere, but it was all still here. That was the only thing that mattered. I sank down onto the living room couch that had narrowly escaped being stolen and pulled out my phone. My mind was now operating on pure, clinical calculation. The first call was to Alina, the divorce lawyer whose number I found online. I secured an appointment for the next morning. The second call was to my bank. I froze all our joint accounts. The third call was to the credit card companies. I canceled all shared cards. By the time I was done making calls, it was almost 6 o'clock in the evening. That's when I realized Maya wasn't home yet. After securing the physical assets and my financial future, I realized I had missed the most critical piece of the puzzle. Maya. She should have been home from school hours ago. I texted her, asking where she was. She replied quickly, saying she was at a friend's house studying. I told her to come home immediately. We needed to talk. She promised to be back in an hour. I spent that hour pacing the damaged house, trying to figure out how to tell my daughter that the mother she loved had just attempted to abandon us and steal our belongings. It was a truth too ugly for a 16-year-old, but it had to be said. When Maya finally walked in, she took one look at my face. I must have looked like I just crawled out of a 48-hour shift, or maybe a bar brawl, and she knew something huge was wrong. I told her to sit down and then explained everything. The U-Haul, Blake, the cops, the attempted theft, all of it. I spoke methodically, laying out the cold, hard facts, watching her face for the expected shock or tears. But what I saw was something else entirely. Guilt. She wasn't surprised at all. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She knew. I asked her straight up, my voice dangerously low, "Did you know?" The silence that followed screamed the answer. She crumpled instantly, tears starting to flow. She said, "Mom made me promise not to tell. She said it would be better this way. Less drama, less painful for everyone." I felt the bottom drop out of my world for the second time that day. My own daughter, the person I had worked 70-hour weeks to protect, was in on the scheme. She had helped keep the secret, while Ashley planned to burn the family to the ground. I asked Maya how long she had known. She mumbled, "A few months." Ashley had been seeing Blake, her high school boyfriend, for about 8 months. She told Maya they were in love, that Blake was her real soulmate, and that she had made a mistake marrying me so young. Blake, with his investment firm money and charm, was everything she should have had, and Maya, tragically, had bought into the fairy tale. She stopped crying and looked at me, an unexpected wave of anger crossing her face. She launched into a full accusation. Blake treated her mother right, took them to nice places, and made her happy. Things I apparently didn't do. He actually shows up, she accused, tears still tracking lines through the dust on her cheeks. He came to my soccer games and actually paid attention. He took us out for expensive dinners. He asked about my day and remembered the details. He made us feel special. I just stared at her. This kid, whose entire life was funded by my exhaustion and discipline, was looking at me like I was the villain. She claimed Blake was more successful, more attentive, more everything than I was. "I'm always at work," she continued, her voice rising. "You miss everything. You come home tired and fall asleep on the couch. Blake actually listens." I felt the punch deep in my chest. My provider identity, the core belief that my sacrifices, ours were love, was being dismantled by the very person I sacrificed for. I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for this house, this life, her future, and she was angry because I missed a few soccer games. The sheer injustice of it left me speechless for a moment. All the practical, necessary labor had been dismissed as mere negligence. My daughter's accusation that Blake was a better father because he was attentive burned through the shock and settled into cold, hard resolve. I kept my voice perfectly level, choosing my words with the same care I used when handling high-voltage wires. "He took you to dinner?" I acknowledged. "That's nice. But answer me this. Maya's Blake paying for the house? Is he paying the electricity bill? Is he covering your private school tuition, or your car insurance, or the dental bills? Is he responsible for anything when you get sick at 3 o'clock in the morning?" Maya went quiet. The sudden shift in focus from romantic fantasy to practical reality silenced her completely. Of course, he wasn't. Blake was the fun guy who showed up for the good parts, the adventure, the expensive meals. I was the guy who handled the actual, crushing weight of responsibility. That, I told her, is what a father does. He provides, he sacrifices. He works the long hours so his family can have security. He may miss the soccer game, but he never misses the mortgage payment. That is not negligence. That is provision. It's the difference between being a plaything and being a provider. Blake has money to burn because he answers to nobody. I answer to you and to the life I promised you. She started crying again, saying Blake treated her like a real dad should, giving her advice and caring about her feelings. mother's narrative, believing that my physical absence during the dinner hour was proof of my emotional worthlessness. I asked her if she truly thought her mother abandoning our marriage and trying to steal our belongings was the right thing to do. Maya got defensive again, saying, "Mom deserves to be happy. She wasted her youth on you." "She is 34 years old," I stated. "She didn't waste anything. She made a choice to build a life. And now she's throwing away a stable home, her family, and her integrity for some high school fantasy with a rich guy who has zero responsibility." The worst moment was when she repeated Ashley's line, looking me straight in the eye. "Blake is better than you. He's more successful, more attentive, more everything." That's when something cold and calculating settled over me. If my wife and my daughter wanted to burn the house down for a fantasy, I was going to show them the full, ugly weight of reality. I stood up. I didn't yell, but the sudden movement and the absolute stillness of my voice stopped her tears mid-fall. "You need to make a choice, Maya," I said. "Uh, you can stay here with me, follow my rules, and live in the stable home I pay for, or you can go live with your mother and Blake. But you cannot have both. You cannot live under my roof and support the man who is actively destroying our family." She looked genuinely shocked. "You can't do that." "I absolutely can," I replied. "This is my house. I pay for everything. I will not sit here and be treated like garbage by my own daughter because some rich man bought her a few expensive dinners." She started screaming that I was being unfair, trying to control her, and that this was exactly why Mom left me. I held firm. "Your mother left because she's selfish. Go be a real family with Blake, but don't come crying to me when that excitement wears off and the reality of his commitment hits." She stormed off to her room, slammed the door, and I immediately heard her on the phone, probably calling Ashley. An hour later, Ashley stormed back into the house, furious, without knocking. She started yelling, accusing me of threatening Maya, manipulating her, and using her as a weapon. I refused to raise my voice. Maya made her choice when she decided to lie to me for months and help you plan to abandon this family, I said calmly. She can go live with you, if that's what she wants, but she will not live here and disrespect the provider of this household. Ashley went quiet for a beat. She asked what I wanted. "What will it take for you to let this go? Not tell Maya's grandparents, not make this ugly?" "I want a divorce," I told her. "Full custody of Maya, the house, and you can have Blake. That's it. Non-negotiable." Her face went pale. She insisted Maya wanted to be with her. I shrugged. "Then she can choose that. But if she chooses Blake and you, she's choosing to give up the life I've provided. No more private school, no more car, no more college fund. I will not fund a child who thinks I'm worthless." Ashley called me vindictive. I told her she was absolutely right. This was her mistake, and there were consequences. Maya walked out of her room, bags packed. She didn't hesitate. She said she was going with Ashley. I didn't try to stop her. I just told her, "You are welcome to come back when you realize what you're giving up." They both left. The house was empty and horribly quiet. I felt absolutely nothing. The house was silent, filled only with the ghosts of the life that had just walked out the door. The immediate, destructive chaos was over, replaced by a cold, grinding focus. My strategic phase had begun. The next morning, I met with Alina, my divorce attorney. She was in her late 40s, sharp, and entirely no nonsense. She listened to the whole story: the affair, the attempted theft, Maya's involvement. Without reaction, just taking precise notes. She confirmed I had a strong case for a fault divorce, given Ashley's adultery and the intent to defraud by attempting to remove marital assets. Elena quickly filed for divorce, and the service was executed strategically. Ashley was served with the papers at her salon, right in front of her co-workers and clients. It was cruel, efficient, and entirely necessary. Ashley called me screaming within the hour. "You humiliated me! You made a scene!" I didn't raise my voice. "You literally tried to rob me blind with a U-Haul and your boyfriend. Hold the lecture on appropriate behavior." I needed to fight with my mind, not my fists, and Alina was my general. Our next move was to secure a restraining order against Blake, prohibiting him from coming near my property or Maya. I pointed out to Elena that while he was not technically involved in the divorce, he was the home wrecker who thought he could walk in and steal my life. "He's the reason we're here," I explained. "The order isn't petty, it's strategic. It cuts off his ability to influence Maya further and forces Ashley to deal with reality instead of living in fantasy land with him." Within a week, the restraining order was granted. Blake was legally banned from my house and from approaching Maya. Ashley was furious again, calling it petty, but the legal maneuver worked perfectly. It meant she couldn't simply keep using my house as a drop-off point, and Blake couldn't play the doting stepfather on my dime. Maya was living with Ashley and Blake. The house felt huge and empty, the silence suffocating. This was the hardest part, the strategic waiting. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't ask Kevin for updates. I knew that reaching out would be seen as weakness, as me caving on the ultimatum I had set, and I was done being the one who always bent. I focused on work, on processing the betrayal through long hours, using the professional discipline I had mastered to impose order on my internal chaos. I had to accept that Maya had made her choice, and I had to trust that the reality of living with Blake would eventually shatter her fantasy. The weeks dragged into 3 weeks. Every night, I wondered if Maya was okay, if Blake was treating her right, and if Ashley was realizing her mistake. But I held the line. I focused on the discovery phase with Alina, gathering the paper trail texts. Ashley had inadvertently left on a shared tablet bank statements showing expensive purchases Ashley had made for herself and Blake. Jewelry, fancy restaurant charges, hotel stays, all while I was paying the mortgage. We also heard subtle reports through the grapevine. The honeymoon phase was wearing thin. Blake had money, but he wasn't used to dealing with the messy, constant presence of a 16-year-old girl and the financial drag of an unhappy mother. There were mentions of arguments, of Blake snapping at Ashley over small things. The reality of having a family, even a stolen one, was hitting him harder than my fist had. I continued to wait, believing in the power of consequences. It was the hardest 3 weeks of my life. But I knew I couldn't rebuild my relationship with my daughter or my self-respect until she experienced the true foundation of her mother's choice. I was betting everything on the difference between my flawed stability and Blake's hollow charm. The strategic silence had lasted 3 weeks. I was holding firm, focusing on the legal filings and the painful loneliness of my empty house. Then, one night around 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Maya. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Her voice was small and tight, like the little girl I used to read bedtime stories to, not the angry teenager who had walked out the door. She kept repeating that Blake wasn't who she thought he was. Finally, she managed to explain. The perfect facade had shattered. Blake had been getting angry, a lot over nothing. snapping at Ashley over dishes in the sink or dinner not being ready on time. The charm and the money were just a thin mask for a volatile temper. Tonight, they'd had a huge fight about Ashley spending too much money on groceries. Blake lost it, started yelling, threw a plate against the wall, and then grabbed Ashley's arm hard enough to leave marks. Maya tried to intervene, and Blake shoved her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to terrify her. Hard enough to make her realize this was not the fairy tale family she had been promised. She asked if she could come home. Please, Dad, can I come home? A part of me, the part that had been betrayed and hurt, wanted to say no, wanted her to sit in the uncomfortable consequence of her choice for a little longer. But the provider, the protector, the father, instantly took over. No matter how angry I wasn't going to leave my kid in a dangerous situation to prove a point. I'm on my way, I told her. I picked her up an hour later. Ashley's small rented place with Blake was a disaster. A broken ceramic plate lay on the floor near the kitchen. Blake was nowhere to be seen, probably out cooling off, or whatever angry men with too much money do when they lose control. Ashley was sitting on the couch, holding an ice pack to her arm, looking small, defeated, and utterly miserable. She didn't say a word when I walked in, just watched as Maya quickly grabbed her packed bags. On the way out, Ashley tried one last time. Tim, wait. Can we talk? I looked at her, then down the hallway, at the evidence of the fight, then back at the marks on her arm. There's nothing to talk about, Ashley. You made your bed. Now you get to sleep in it. The drive away was silent until we were a few blocks away. I pulled over. I needed to see what I already suspected. I turned on the overhead light and gently took Maya's arm. There were bruises, finger-shaped marks where Blake had grabbed her. They made my blood boil with a cold, righteous fury far surpassing the rage I felt when I first hit him. This wasn't about furniture or adultery. This was about safety. I didn't drive home. I drove straight to the police station. We spent 2 hours there. They took photos of the bruises, documented everything, and asked Maya questions about what had happened. She told them the whole story, how perfect Blake seemed at first, how he changed once they moved in, and how tonight wasn't the first time he'd gotten physical, just the first time it scared her enough to call me. The officers were professional. They said Blake would likely face charges for assault. Finally, I took Maya home. We sat down in the living room, the space that had been so filled with accusations and ultimatums just 3 weeks earlier. She apologized, her tears remorseful this time, not defensive. She said she was stupid. Blake seemed perfect, but it was all an act. She confessed that Ashley was already miserable and knew she had made a huge mistake. I forgive you, I told her, finally allowing the wall around my heart to fall. The deep, agonizing pain I had felt when she called Blake the ideal father was replaced by a protective surge of love. But things are going to be different now. You are going to show me respect. You are going to contribute to this household. And you are going to understand that being a parent isn't about being fun. It's about being present and being there when it matters. She agreed. I get it now, she whispered. He was all flash and no substance. You were the one who was always taking care of me. My wife left me for her ex, and my daughter called him the ideal father until I exposed the truth and destroyed her fantasy, I said, leaning back. The words that had been a simple summary were now the full ugly, redemptive truth. The divorce proceedings accelerated. Once the evidence of the affair, the attempted theft, and Maya's testimony about Blake's volatility came out, Ashley's lawyer advised her to settle immediately. She had no leg to stand on. The court documents laid out the facts, the text messages between her and Blake that Maya provided, the bank statements showing extravagant, secret spending, the police report from the attempted property removal, and the police report detailing Blake's assault. Ashley's lawyer tried to spin it, claiming she was an unhappy wife who felt neglected and that Blake filled a void I had created. But Alina shut that down instantly. Unhappiness does not grant the right to commit adultery or attempt to steal marital assets, Elena argued. Ms. Ashley was so miserable, she should have filed for divorce before sneaking around for 8 months. The judge agreed with the facts. I got the house, primary physical custody of Maya, and Ashley was ordered to pay child support, given my significantly higher income. The whole settlement took about 4 months to finalize. During that time, Ashley and Blake's relationship imploded completely. His anger issues were real. The fairy tale ended abruptly one night when Blake gave her a black eye. She finally saw what Maya and I had warned her about. Blake's charm was a mask for someone controlling and volatile. She left him. Blake, predictably, filed for a restraining order against her, which he violated a few weeks later by showing up at her work and making a scene. Karma has a weird sense of timing, but it rarely forgets where people live. Ashley tried to reconcile with me one night, showing up on my porch crying, saying she made a mistake and never stopped loving me. She asked if we could try again. I looked at her, broken and mascara streaked, and I felt nothing. No, I told her. That ship sailed, hit an iceberg, and sank. You showed me who you really are, and I believe you. She asked about Maya. I told her that relationship was between them, but Ashley needed to get her own life together, get stable housing, and be consistent if she wanted to be involved. She nodded, wiped her tears, and left. It was the last real conversation we had. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, the chaos was finally over, replaced by a deep, sustaining peace. My focus had shifted entirely from fighting a war to building a real life. I even got a promotion at work. Instead of grinding out 60-hour weeks in dangerous industrial jobs, I was running my own crew, installing systems in new commercial buildings. The new role came with a significant raise and, critically, better hours. I usually capped out around 45 hours a week. I was home for dinner most nights. I had energy left at the end of the day to actually help Maya with her homework and be present. The money was better, too. Good enough that I set up a proper retirement account and maxed out Maya's college fund. I had found a better balance, redefining my identity from our sole provider to a present father. Maya moved in with me full-time 2 months after the incident with Blake. Her grades went up immediately once she was back in a stable environment. We had long, hard conversations about trust and respect. She apologized countless times for siding with Ashley and Blake, and I forgave her. Our new dynamic was a trade. Off she contributed to the household, doing chores and following rules, and in return I was more involved and less focused solely on the grind. Last weekend, Maya and I were making dinner together when she asked if I ever missed her mother. I thought about it honestly, looking around my kitchen at the quiet order we had established. I told her I miss who I thought she was, but that person never really existed. So no, not really. Ashley was still out there making bad choices, last I heard, dating some guy from a car dealership. She rented a room from a friend and struggled to make child support payments. The fairy tale hadn't worked out. I, however, was doing better than fine. I had started seeing someone Nicole. She was a smart, noke, nonsense project manager for one of the companies that hired my crew. We met when she called me out for using the wrong gauge wire. She was right. They had changed the specs. She was divorced, understood the baggage, and we were taking things slow. She was completely different from Ashley in every way that mattered, and Maya liked her, which was a huge relief. To finally close the door on the ghosts of betrayal, Nicole and I recently sold the house, the one Ashley tried to steal. We wrapped up all the paperwork, even splitting the profits with Ashley as a final business transaction in the name of sanity. I took my half and invested it, putting a large sum toward Maya's college fund, and used the rest as a down payment on a new place for Nicole, Maya, and me. It was smaller, cozier, and had zero history. Maya decorated her own room. She has sleepovers with her friends and does her homework at the kitchen table while Nicole and I make dinner. It's normal. It's stable. It's the real life that Ashley blew up looking for a fantasy. A year ago, I thought the betrayal would destroy me. But here I stand, stronger than before. The silence in my house used to feel like screaming. Now, it just feels like peace. We found our way back, Maya and I, and our foundation is built on truth and presence, not just provision.